One of the fastest gateways to having more damage in Maple is cubing your gear. You get a ton of damage from rolling attack lines on your weapon, secondary, and emblem. Percent total damage is a fine settle too. And for everything else, you'll be wanting to roll your class's main stat. Let's start by going over tiers for cubes. That's these outlines around your equips, which indicate the tier of said potential. Red is unrevealed, blue is rare, purple is epic, yellow is unique, and green is legendary, the highest tier. Eventually, you'll want your higher level stuff to be legendary because it gives you the highest amount of stats per line, while also being in a higher level equipment tier, giving a little more stats just based off that. Anything 160 and above is the highest tier, giving up to 13% main stat lines at legendary. If you end up with 3-line stats on unique, that's worth keeping in some cases, like for armor and accessories. Now let's get familiar with the cube types. These are mystical cubes, which are very common and drop from daily bosses, elite mobs, and elite bosses pretty frequently. Also monster collection, and a ton of other places I'm probably forgetting. They're extremely common. These cubes can tier your equips up, but only up to epic and at a very low chance. Next we have hard cubes, which drop sometimes from weekly bosses and go up to unique. You can buy these in Meso shops in Reboot for 7.5 mil Mesos each, but save your money for better cubes. I'll talk about them in a second. There's also solid cubes, which can tier your gear up to legendary. These cubes are much more rare, coming from various events and weekly bosses, and sometimes the highest tier of hunter pouches from Pollo and Fritto. For gloves, these cubes, and only these cubes, can give a special line called Auto Steal, which ups your chances at getting more drops, such as Meso bags while grinding. If you head into the cash shop and head over to the Enhance tab, you can get some way better cubes for Mesos. Well, Mesos in Reboot, but for Reg server, they cost actual NX, or you could get some free monthly ones with reward points. Glowing cubes can tier up to legendary and are just good for having an infinite resource, as long as you have the money, for rolling at legendary. Lastly, bright cubes are the single best cube in the game for both tiering up and for also the fact that you can select which potential you want to keep. They also have the best chance at rolling something called prime lines. So each tier of gear has its maximum possible percentage it can give of any given stat. They're usually the same across the board for all the main stats, percent attack and magic attack and percent health, but for percent all stats it's about always 3% lower than the main stat at most tiers. For the sake of explanation, I'll be going into this part as if we're only talking about gear from levels 71 up to level 150. 151 and higher get more stats, and most gear you'll be wearing will be around this level for a good chunk of time. Starting with main class stats like strength, dex, int, and luck. At rare, the highest you can get is 3%. At epic, this goes up to 6%. You can still get 3% lines, but the highest possible line here is that 6%. That is the prime line at this tier. Moving on, unique's prime line goes up to 9%, and legendaries is 12%. Your goal with cubes, at least on accessories and armor, is to get as many main stat lines as you can. With bright cubes, the chances of this goes up way higher, being able to roll multiple prime lines on the second and third lines, whereas with glowing and solid cubes, the best you can get is usually just one prime at best. I think those can get multiple prime lines, but it's way easier with bright cubes. For weapons, secondary, and emblem, their prime lines for both percent boss and percent IED at legendary are 40%, and percent damage and percent attack are both 12%. As for how to cube efficiently, it depends on what your budget is. Also, if it's a character you plan on maining and how much you want to invest in them, etc. But starting off for both boss meals and new players, toss potentials onto gear you want to use, either through potential scrolls or transferring up from gear 10 levels under the piece you want to cube. If you have a good amount of Legion coins, you could also purchase epic pot scrolls with a 100% success rate, 2 a week for 300 coins each. Sometimes events and daily gifts give these out too. Anyways, since you'll more than likely end up with an abundance of mystical cubes across all your characters from just playing the game, start off with just getting some epic tiered gear. You'll get more overall damage, rolling for percent attack and percent damage on your weapon, secondary, and emblem. If you don't have much money to work with, don't sweat over trying to get unique and legendary early on, especially for gear you'll replace soon enough, like Pencilier. Once you start getting better gear, some more money to work with, some higher star force, maybe some gear with good boss flames, and some equips you'll be using for a long while, like CRA set or Absolab, etc. Then you can start moving on to bright and glowing. Also, if you end up with any hard cubes through bossing or events and such, you can throw it at your gear for a chance at some good unique lines. Again, if you're not a reboot player, I wouldn't bother buying the ones in general shops for Mesos. Not really worth it. Since I will be investing in my Zero a bit, let's cube some of their equips I'll be using on them as an example. Start off with any of your gear you'll be keeping for a while, that's at Epic. Get some bright cubes for a higher tier up chance. You can settle on any of the rolls along the way if you want, if there's lines you end up with you want to keep, or if you want to make efficient use of your cubes and bring all your gear up one extra line at a time, but aim for unique and legendary. Once you get to legendary, stop using bright cubes and swap to glowing cubes, since they're half the cost and won't be tiering up any further anyways. Also, there's a pretty good chance they don't have the main stat lines you're after. If you do end up with good initial tier up lines, obviously keep that. For everything else, aim for at least 2 useful lines with glowing cubes. For armor, it would be 2 lines, prime or not, of any main stat your class uses. For my Zero, I'm after strength, so I'll settle on that. For weapon, secondary, and emblem, you'll mainly want as much percent attack as you can get, percent magic attack if you're a magician, but also generally some boss. IED is useful too, depending on what stage you're at in the game, but a general rule of thumb, I'd say, is to aim for 90 to 95% or higher. The closer to 100% the better, but diminishing returns does happen the more IED you rack up, and at a point it becomes more worth it to just get percent attack or percent boss instead. Having a line or 2 of IED if you need it, that's fine though. For accessories, you have 2 options. If it's your main damage dealing gear, go for percent main stat. If you have some extra accessories lying around that you used to use, or don't plan on using for much longer, at Legendary you could turn it into drop and Meso gear. Accessories are pendants, rings, face and eye, and earrings. The more drop, the better for both bossing and training for extra chance at familiar cards, and nodes, and droplets, etc. For Meso, this caps out at 100% across all items. Since these lines can only be gotten at Legendary, and are always a flat 20% each, that means 5 pieces with percent Meso maxes out how much you can get with equipment. You can get more percent Meso past this soft equip cap through Legion Wealth, Wealth Acquisition Potions, and Inner Ability, but keep in mind you don't need more than 100% on equips. You could also get decent skills through various equips. Hats can get Mystic Door and Advanced Blessing, gloves can get Sharp Eyes and Speed Infusion, shoes can get Haste and Combat Orders, and pants can get Hyper Body. They're not usually the best lines to get on these equips, but if you're low on V-Matrix slots, they can help, especially Speed Infusion and Combat Orders. Lastly, gloves specifically have 2 unique lines no other equips get. As I talked about earlier, they can get Auto Steal, but the main line you'll want on gloves is 8% critical damage at Legendary. This line outweighs every other stat on gloves by a landslide. It gives you a ton of overall extra damage if your crit rate is at 100%. You'll be wanting to get at least one of these lines once your gear is at Absolab, and if you have enough money to throw at them, since crit damage counts as a prime line, use bright cubes for a higher chance of getting 2 of these. In extremely rare cases, it's possible to get 3 crit damage lines, but getting triple prime anything is a costly nightmare, especially crit damage triple prime. If you play Reboot, you can unironically expect to, on average, spend trillions of Mesos on bright cubes, and still probably never get it. It's not impossible. I have seen very, very few people in Reboot show off triple prime crit gloves and smegas. Just don't rush in aiming for this. Oh, I should also mention, hats get a special line at Legendary too. -1 or -2 second skill cooldown. I believe both of these are prime lines. Most classes aren't going to really make any viable use of these lines, but some classes like Zero and Phantom etc. make pretty good use of these lines. Again, they're fairly rare and cap out at 5 seconds minimum for said cooldown skills, but I figured I'd mention them to cover all the lines on gear. I think that's all the lines you can get. On a final note, I'll mention about twice every year, usually around summer and then again around Christmas or around the middle to end of December, Nexon has these events called Double Miracle Time. My very first video on this channel was actually me complaining about this over the summer. With bright and glowing cubes, you can get double the chance to tier up your gear. It can sometimes even tier up twice, going straight to Legendary from Epic, or Unique from Rare. So if you're playing around those times, that's a good way to save on cubing costs. Thanks for sticking around this long, and if you were lost or confused on cubing, I hope any of the information in this video helped you. If you want more general MapleStory related videos, like guides on just about everything, including guides on various classes, why not stick around and subscribe? I try to get videos out about every week or two, and got a pretty good lineup for ideas of what I want to cover for at least the next few weeks, but if there's any in the future you'd like me to go over, let me know in the comments. That's all.